Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Pradeep Chhibber, senior from my college, a friend of over 40 years. Professor Pradeep Chhibber is a professor of political science at the University of California, Berkeley. He has authored and co-authored several books, including Ideology and Identity, The Changing Party Systems of India, Religious Practice and Democracy in India, The Formation of National Party Systems, Federalism and Party Competition in Canada, Great Britain, India and the United States, and Democracy Without Associations, Transformation of the Party System and Social Cleavages in India. He holds the Indo-American Community Chair in India Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. I was talking to him about the talk that he's going to present. He didn't divulge much. He says, listen to it carefully. You require a lot of attention because it's strongly data driven. Over to Professor Chhibber.
अच्छा ठीक है बैठ के बोलेंगे थैंक यू सर आई फील वेरी अनकंफर्टेबल सिटिंग बट फर्स्ट खड़े होकर बोले इट्स ओके आई हैव अ बूमिंग वॉइस सो फर्स्ट थैंक यू एवरीबॉडी I'd like to thank thank you I'd like to
Do you want a lecture?
No, I don't want a lecture. ठीक है Do we need this? Yes. Yes? Okay. Wow, that's loud. Okay, sorry. So first, thank you Sanjiv for that introduction and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to present this new work and I just want to give a shout out to three people who are sitting here who you can ask any questions that I cannot answer. One is Shri, who is responsible for a little part of the data. The other is Rahul, my co-author in Ideology and Identity. So if you have any questions about the politics, you ask him. And there's Pranav Shri, who actually helped collect some of the data. And so if you have any data collection questions, please ask him. Okay, so I'm going to beg off on taking any responsibility for what I'm going to talk about. I just want to preface this by saying that this is a very data intensive talk, which means that I am going to go, I've been asked to go rather slowly because I'm a political scientist. And political scientists, whether we like it or not, have their own language. And I will use some words and some concepts which I want to make sure that everybody is on board with, because the argument will proceed pretty quickly once you get those concepts. So I'll have to go a little bit slowly and I'm sorry, and I'll go over the data. Second, can I please ask you for a favor? I'm going to put a lot of graphs up. If you have any difficulty understanding, just raise your hand. Stop me for clarifications. It's really important that we make sure we work with each other. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. Finally, and I'm going to say this in all honesty, this is a very data-driven talk, and this is not data that is generated by surveys. This is data that is being generated by the Election Commission through the EVMs and the Census of India. Those are the only two data sources I'm using. So, if you have any questions about the data, about the veracity of the data, about the validity of the data, you know what kind of data you're questioning. I'm not making any of this up. This is actual data that the government of India has collected, and I think it's fairly robust data. It is as robust data as we can get on Indian elections. But the data is going to challenge some of the ways you think about Indian politics. And so I want all of you to be just a little bit mindful that one of the tragedies or the pleasures of doing empirical work is that sometimes when you look at the evidence, your core beliefs are shaken. And I'm going to show you some data, and while I don't have any direct evidence, that data is consistent with only one set of, clearly inconsistent with how we think about Indian politics, and could be consistent with a bunch of other things, but it's clearly inconsistent with how we think of Indian politics in a very stereotypical way. So that's the plan, and please stop and ask if you have any questions or clarifications. This is work with the co-author, Francesca Jensenius, who teaches at the University of Oslo. And me. Part of this initial work was also done with Sanjiv at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, and we thank him. We have a paper out with him, which we are looking at. So, we know this, right? 70 years of free and fair elections. We also know, and I just go giving you some data to warm you up, so to speak, that elections are very competitive in India, and many candidates compete for each seat, and then multiple parties get votes in each constituency. Okay, these are just basic facts, and this is, I'm only speaking of Lok Sabha elections, and that's it. So here's the Lok Sabha elections data. So these are the number of candidates who compete for each seat. This is the median number of candidates, and this is known as a beam plot. The reason we use this, it looks very pretty. I don't know if you agree with it or not, but part of my job is to make very nice looking graphs. The emphasis, my co-author is very good at doing this, so I also try and keep up with them. But this is a graph she generated, and you can see the number of candidates starting from 1962 all the way to 1966 keeps going up. You increase the candidate security deposit from 500 rupees to 10,000, it drops, and then the number of candidates shoots up again. But you can see in some cases there are very few candidates, in some cases there are lots of candidates. So there are places where there are many candidates who are competing in the Lok Sabha, right? So this is not a big surprise, right? This is well-known Lok Sabha data. And what's interesting is that voters vote from multiple parties. So this is how many parties are getting votes in each constituency, in each this is the average. Once again, the median is just over 2. And when you look, the range goes from one party to almost 6, 7, sometimes there are 10 parties getting votes, and we've dropped all parties that are getting below, 2% of the vote. So this is, you can see that over the years, the number of parties that are getting vote has gone up a lot. It came down in 1977. We all know what happened when there was a Janta coalition. It also came down in 2019, but the average is almost close to 3, right? So there are lots of parties that are competing in Indian elections, right? This is not we know all this. This is just a setup, right? So I'm going to show you lots of graphs like this. I'm not going to do, there'll be no fancy statistical models at the moment. Now the fun starts. How do we explain outcomes in Indian elections? We all have our pet theories. And I am going to speak just about one. There are other interpretations, but one standard interpretation is, for want of a better word, or stereotypes, Indians don't cast their vote, they vote their caste, right? And so standard claim is social linkages are important for explaining Indian politics. And the other thing that's important is these social linkages can be seen in 2 things. First, there are strongholds. How many of you believe that parties have guns? Oh, I forgot this is India, nobody raises their hand for anything, right? Because everybody is afraid of being wrong. So, I was teaching in Bangalore and I asked people, and people said it as in a typical survey response, 2 people raised their hand, 2 people didn't, everybody else was don't know, right? But we all believe parties have strongholds, right? Because there are castes will exist in areas, parties have strongholds. So you can say parties have guns, right? And second, you can also believe that most people vote their caste. This caste and religion drive the voting, and most people vote their caste. So that's how social linkages work, right? That is a received theory for the study of Indian elections. And even I will blame, I think Gilles and Rahul who are sitting here, since I know them well, I think I can blame them that they have also peddled the same logic, right? Okay, sure, okay. Let me just say this, that most of the evidence for caste voting actually comes from a few castes that are tied to a party. So for example, you can easily say that the upper caste by and large in some places vote for the BJP. You can say that the Yadavs vote for the SP. You can say that maybe the Jatavs voted for the BSP. You can say these things, right? But if you think in the landscape of castes, that's very few people, right? So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind. All these arguments predict stability. Why? If you believe that caste voting is important and people vote their caste and people's caste identities don't change, we should get the same outcomes time and time again, right? Yes or no? That follows logically. But what am I going to argue? What I'm going to show to you today is Indian elections are very uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty in Indian elections. There are very few strongholds in Indian elections. In fact, you will be shocked when I show you the data as to how many strongholds there are in Indian elections. And I will show you using polling station data that locally, voters don't vote for the same party repeatedly. So even with a sample of 2,500 people or so, voters are swinging across from one election to the other. In the same polling booth, voters don't vote for the same party, or, there is significant volatility, a word that is going to, the first political sciencey word which is appearing, there will be another one. What does volatility mean? Volatility essentially means it's a measure political scientists use to calculate the swing of votes from one party to the other. So if one party gets, and the index goes from 0 to 100, so if a party gets 50% in one election, then 50, if there are two parties, and they both get 50% in the first election, in election 1, they both get 50% in election 2, the difference between their vote share is 0, so the volatility is 0. If one party gets 0 and the other party gets 100, and one party gets 100 and next time gets a 0, right? It's complete split, the volatility will be 100. In other words, how volatile, in other words, in Indian elections, there's a lots of volatility. So now if you just agreed with me, and you all seem to nod your head that Indian politics is driven by caste and caste predicts stability, and I tell you that Indian elections are volatile, you're going to say something has to give, right? Something is going on, right? We don't know what it is, but we certainly cannot agree without thinking hard, saying, listen, caste is what drives everything. So here's the electoral volatility for lower house elections, only for parliamentary elections. I'm not showing you any local level volatility. When you look at this data, the US is at 3.8, two parties, right? Really boring politics, right? Yep, compared to Indian politics. India is at 26.7 for the years 1952 to 2004. Above us are Venezuela and the Philippines, and below us are Mexico, Brazil, Sri Lanka, Chile. Right? So Indian elections are volatile. That means there's lots of vote swings between parties this is only for the Lok Sabha. Is that fine? So we cannot turn around and say, listen, Indian elections are stable. So the question I'm going to ask today is, why are election outcomes to the Lok Sabha so uncertain? Okay. Now I'm not going to give you any fancy theories based on surveys, and I will let, or some ideas or some survey experiments, I'll let my fellow co-authors and friends answer those questions. I'm just going to give you an answer based on polling station data. And the claim I'm going to make is, our empirical claim is, the roots of this uncertainty lie in polling stations and villages and towns, which means the reason an MP election, if you look at this data, this is for the MP, this data is for the MPs, right? That the reason this number is so high is because at the root, at the very bottom, there's a lot of uncertainty, which means in polling stations and villages and towns is where the uncertainty lies. And that uncertainty is what explains the uncertainty, or accounts for, explains is too strong, accounts for the uncertainty at the higher level. Okay, that's the claim I'm going to make. And how am I going to make that claim? I'm going to make that claim in two ways, right? First, once again, is a political scientist. I'm sorry, the other point which we don't have to agree, but let's for a moment humor me, please, and we can discuss this later. Most political scientists agree, for good or bad, some are, I would think, for bad, but most people would say for good, that in first past the post systems like we have in India, right, single member, simple plurality, the person with the most votes wins in any constituency, two parties should get most of the votes, right? That's what most political scientists agree with. So I'm going to show you that at the local level there are wasted votes, or there are candidates or voters who are not voting either for the winning candidate or for the runner-up. Which means that if you go to any constituency, there are two candidates who are the leading candidates, but there are many places in each constituency, polling booths, where the top two candidates, where the votes are not being given to the top two candidates, they have been given to other candidates. And in fact, just to give you a preview, I'm also going to say this to you, there are at least 11% of the polling booths in every constituency where the member of parliament is not even in the top two, the winning candidate. Which means there is something going on which we need to get a hold of. And the second thing I'm going to show you is that at the local level there is great volatility, And this volatility is greater at the local level than even at the parliamentary level. Lots of volatility at the local level. Okay, so in other words, why are election outcomes in India so uncertain? Election outcomes in India are uncertain for two reasons. Number one, people are wasting their votes, right? You're voting for candidates who are not going to win. And number two, at the local level, there's great volatility. Is everybody good with the idea of volatility? And the logic I'm going to use here, called the top two logic, right? If you're voting for not the top two, that's what's happening. Is that good? Pranav, I thought you already had a copy of the slides. Just kidding, okay. Already. Anybody, any questions about this, please? Is this clear enough? Okay. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sir, please have mic.
Yes. May I have your name, sir?
Hi, I'm Sandeep Narvani. If I
Yes,
may
sir.
ask a question at this stage, is there any empirical reason for two parties having popularity and not a third one? I mean, there have been many quadrangular contests as well in India.
There are triangular contests, but by and large, you'll be so. And I'll show you some data. If you believe in the average is about 2 even in India, right? Has consistently been, and there are.
Even your ENOC data is showing that.
Yeah.
The first one like you should. So the median is that.
The median is just over 2, right?
More
When
than
you look.
50% of the contests in India have two parties.
There are 2 parties, mostly, and that's true across the world in these kinds of systems. There's good empirical evidence for that. Thank you, Rahul. See, it's good to have bright people sitting in the room. Okay. Why is the, and of course you're going to ask, if I'm going to show this to you empirically, why is this the case? And this is where I'm going to get into trouble. I think the reason this is the case is, it may be that they may be the limited incorporation of some groups and areas into the political process. That's why there's uncertainty, and I'll talk about that once I get to the end. So that, by then you're convinced about one thing, and maybe after that you'll be ready to hang me. Okay, so what's my plan for the talk? So first, after that long introduction, I'm going to describe the data we collected. It took 7-8 years, right, of our lives. I will then show you that there are no strongholds in Indian elections. So if you've heard this slide, you can then fall asleep if you don't want to see the data. I will also show you that locally Indian elections are extremely volatile. And this idea should put to rest the idea that the same groups win, right? That people vote for the same party over and over again. Of course, I have some data limitations, but I'm going to show you that this is true even for the BJP, which won handily in UP in 2014 and 19. BJP won easily in 2014 and 19. That was from 42% their vote went to 49%, right? That was a resounding victory. But the fact of the matter is that even then, I will show you data that there is some volatility that underlies the BJP support, and across a series of statistical specifications, which I will not bore you with, but I will just share the results with you, we find that some groups and areas drive these unexpected electoral outcomes. Okay, that's the plan for the talk. Is that good? Okay. So let me begin. There is other supportive evidence which I don't want to share with you. I'm going to focus only on what political scientists call aggregate data. Aggregate data means it's not survey data. This is just election returns and census data today. There is actually good survey data that can back some of the claims I'm making, such as there's a paper by K.K. Kailash which shows that, the poor, for instance, don't express opinions on many of the political issues, and the poor and illiterate, for instance, are less likely to make up their minds on who to vote for until the day of the election. And there's very good survey evidence for that as well. So in other words, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to stick to the aggregate data. So let's begin. What is the data we collected? So there are 3 sources of data. One is the PC level election returns, and if you have any questions about the veracity, Gilles is the man to answer those questions. Take responsibility, right? We also collected village level election returns for 2009, 2014 and 2019, and 2019 is only for Uttar Pradesh and Haryana. We also have census data from 2001 and 2011, and we want to thank Sanjiv for helping us collect this data. Okay. The polling booth data, and I actually think, quite honestly, I should let Pranav answer these questions because it actually helped us do this. This is a nightmare. So anybody who wants to study polling data, right? It's a challenge. Why is it a challenge? First, each polling station has a unique number ID. Okay, we all know that. But now let's say you want to look at the 2009 data and the 2014 data. The number changes from one election to the other. So you can't say in constituency 74, give me polling station 23 and match it to polling station 23 because those polling stations are different, so you can't use the number. So what you need to do, you can only match the polling booth from two elections by matching the polling booth to the village in which the polling booth is located. Okay? Where do you get the location data from? To get the location data, you actually have to go to the electoral roll. The electoral roll, mentions the village, the main Mukhi Gaon, and other villages on the election commission, and you have to actually look at that. You look at the first page of the electoral roll. There are lakhs of documents. The ER could be in Hindi or a regional language. The census data, of course, is in English. So you can imagine all the joys of doing that. First, so in other words, you need to get the name, and you have to get the name from the electoral roll. Once you have the name of the village from the electoral roll, you can then think about matching it. And that, you can see, is not an easy job because the electoral roll is also continuously updated, in which case you can't really use it unless you use it at a particular point. Also, a polling station can have voters from two different villages, so you need to account for that. Third, of course, is matching the election data to the census, right? And of course, what are the issues? There are different spellings, there's imperfect matching, multiple villages can have the same name in a constituency, etc., etc. I have a colleague of mine, I gave this talk at Princeton 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, and he said he tried to do this for Canada, the province of Alberta, and he gave up. Because it's virtually impossible to take the census data and the election data and try and match them in any reasonable way. I'm going to maybe talk out of place. I spoke to one political party in India. They said, oh, we've done it through GIS mapping. And I said, what's your accuracy rate? And the person said 50%. I thought that's a coin toss, right? It's either heads or tails. Heads I'm right, tails I'm wrong, right? So for us, the accuracy rate is over 90%, and much of this is done by visual matching. Basically, you go through it page by page. Some of it can be automated, but the rest of it is done like this. And I think it took Sanjiv about 3 years with 3 people doing this continuously, and it took us 1 year with 2 people working just to get the UP data. So you can scoff at it, you can make fun of us, but I just want you to realize it's a lot of work. And don't ask me why we did it, but we did it. Okay. So what is the data we have? So for 2009, we have 4,70,000 polling stations. For 2014, we have 21,827 polling stations. On average, there are 889 electors in each of the polling stations. We then collapsed this to the village level and linked it to census identifiers. I'll talk about that in a minute. 36% of the villages have 1 polling station, 22% of the villages have less than 1, and 41% of the villages have more than 1 polling station. So it's a little bit, that's just to give you a lay of the land. Is that okay? So that's what we did with the data collection. For all these years, all I have to produce is, all I can show you is 1 slide. He kind of feels sheepish, okay? What are our findings? So first, this is me. I love numbers. I'm really sorry. May bore some of you. But this is the average vote share in a polling booth in India, in a village actually, in 2009 and 2014. For those of you who are statistically inclined, what a beautiful bell-shaped curve. Right? Very, very nice. The average largest vote share is 53%, and you can see distributed on both sides. The average is 55%. So the average winner in a village, winner is a euphemistic word, right? The person who gets, right? The maximum average winner just gets about 50% of the votes in a village, okay? And now to answer your question, the average number of parties getting votes in each polling station is also 2. In 2009, it was a little bit over 2, it was 2.7. In 2014, for obvious reasons, it was 2.5. So this is the distribution of votes, and if you can see this number, the median is at 2. The mode is 2, right? In a village in India, where there are 2,000 voters, 2,000 plus voters, 2 candidates are getting most of the votes. If you, now, some part of me wants to wax and wane about political scientists maybe saying something useful, but that's amazing, right? That's what it looks like. So these are just the raw data. So I estimate about 2 people on average. In other words, in each village, on average, the effective competition is between 2 people, right? It's not between 5, 6, 7. It's between 2 on average. Next question. Are we now getting ready? And the first table is coming up. Are there strongholds in Indian elections? Right? For all of us, one person who raised their hand, thank you. Right? Everybody else was a don't know. So let's have a look. This is a little bit complicated, so let me explain this table to you. So if a person got more, how many polling stations did a candidate get more than 50% of the votes? In 2009 was 56.75. Is that good? Yes? Does everybody see that? In how many polling stations in 2014 did the candidate get more than 50% of the vote? 61.85% of the time. How many times was it that the same person got more than 50% of the vote? 10. That's if you define a threshold at 50%. You don't have to define it at 50%. I don't know what a stronghold means. This is my value judgment, right? I just picked these numbers to give you the full distribution in the spirit of intellectual honesty. If you ask me, I initially thought a Gada should be at 65 or 70% at least, right? If in 2,000, 2,500 people you're not getting the vote of 1,500 people, what kind of a stronghold is it? If that's the case, there's nothing. It's not there isn't nothing, but at 10% means, there are roughly 20,000 places in India that you could call Gajia.
Is this the number of votes or number of votes polled?
This is the how many times in how many constituencies did the winner
50% of the votes polled?
Yeah, 50% of the votes polled, right? That's the count, yeah. Is that okay? So the numbers are various. So in other words, if you do nothing else, you should walk out of this room saying there are no strongholds in Indian politics. Please, if you've done that, and if you're convinced by this data, my job is done, I can retire peacefully, right? Just kidding. Is that okay? So that's just one piece of data, right? Now comes the more interesting part. Voters don't vote for the same party repeatedly. How do we know that? What we do is, we look at average volatility in each election, right? In each polling station. Is that okay? Recall what is volatility? Volatility is a swing from one party to the other. Is that fine? So the average volatility in 2014 was 36%, which means the vote share between 2009 and 2014, right? The swing was 36.7%. Recall that the national number is only 25. At the local level, where there are 2,500 people, the volatility is 36.7. Is everybody good with that? Lots of swing in a polling booth. Now, of course, there are some of you who are political scientists and asking, Pradeep, have you lost your mind? What if there's an incumbent running? Right? No, what if, sorry. This volatility can happen for 2 reasons. And this is an important point. This volatility can happen for 2 reasons. One is a new party comes in, right? And the other is volatility between the existing parties. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Why do votes swing? New entrant. Why do votes swing? Same entrant swinging your votes, right? Same parties, but I'm swinging my vote. Political scientists call that extra system volatility, and you can see the extra system volatility is only 11. The average within system volatility, which means even when the same parties are competing, the volatility is 25 in the polling stations. So in a polling station, enormous amounts of volatility. Okay? And the claim essentially is, remember, at 25, over 25, India has some of the highest volatility rates internationally, but at 33, it's way off the charts, especially locally. It's, it's very, very high. And the argument is that high local level volatility accounts for the high volatility in parliamentary constituencies. And I'll talk about why that should be the case in a moment. Is that okay? Now, some of you must be asking, but wait a minute. If you're thinking along with me, or if there are some people on the right, I'm sure, who are thinking about this, sorry to pick on them. which is what if there's an income, same party is running again, what happens then? The number drops from 36 to 35, doesn't change that much, and our extra system volatility drops, the average within system volatility remains the same. So even when an incumbent is running, which means the winning candidate is the same person is running again, there is still volatility. This winning MP is running again, there are still people swinging their votes. If there is so much swinging of votes at the local level, I will just leave you with a question. Can you actually turn around and say that there are deep links between parties and castes and social divisions? I will let you ponder and answer that question for you to your own satisfaction. But to me, the data is very clear and points in one direction. Of course, this is a lot to say. This is a lot for me to make a claim about. But I think this is something I want all of you to just take away and think about it for a minute. No strongholds, lots of volatility among 25 to 2600 people swinging their votes from one election to the other. Even when the winning MP is running, something is going on here. Is that okay? Fair enough? So what have we established so far? As I promised, I started the talk by saying there's no strongholds in Indian politics. We've established that just by looking at the polling station data. And second, there are lots of volatility locally, lots of votes swinging between one party to the other. If that is the case, can you actually say that people are voting along social lines and the elections are stable locally? Because you can't predict. The social division argument to predict stability, and there is certainly no stability in Indian elections. Fair enough? Okay. So, it is hard to argue then that the party system is structured by social divisions. This is not to deny that there are some castes that mostly vote for a party, but that by itself cannot influence election outcomes significantly, right? There is something else going on here. Okay, so that's the second claim. That's what the local level volatility tells us. So this is a nice way of saying that essentially, if you look at this beautiful graph, Francesca made, Indian elections are extremely unpredictable. Most of the cases fall in this unpredictable category, but I don't want to belabor this very much. Okay? Lots of volatility, lots of parties competing, and we have no idea what's going on. The question, of course, the other question some of you would ask, listen, you're comparing 2009 and 2014. And 2014 was an exceptional election. Modi won handily, it was surprising. And can you really draw any conclusions from those two elections? So to answer that question, as a good social scientist or a budding social scientist or a close to retirement social scientist, I said, maybe we should look at, this was an accident. Can we actually use the 2009 and 2014 polling station data to draw general conclusions about Indian elections? Most of you will say, no, you must be mad, right? That was an exceptional election, so what are you doing? So what we did is, if my claim is correct, and I'm going to make a strong argument here, that the claim you're making is correct, it should hold for a really tough case. And what is the tough case? BJP, UP elections in 2014 and 2019, right? The same party won. It won twice, it won handily, right? The vote share went from 42% to 49%. Fair enough? If the same party is winning, all the results I have should not hold, correct? Let's find out if that's correct or not, right? This is what I love about empirical work. Either it works or it doesn't. And you'll see it works a little bit, but not fully. But there we are. What happened testing the argument in UP number 1? I did exactly the stronghold data, which is how many candidates got more than 50% of the vote? 51.41% of the polling stations, right? These guys got more than 50% of the votes polled. In 2019, there were 83.43% of the polling stations where the candidate got more than 50% of the vote. The same winner happened only in 33% of the times, which means it's the same candidate who got more than 50% in 2014 and in 2019 in a polling station. And if you take the aggressive stronghold data of 70%, the number is only 8%. So of course the BJP did well, and these results are not as beautiful as they were for 2009 and 2014, but the fact of the matter is that there are still you have a question?
Sorry to interrupt you. In 2019, maybe a lot of the winning candidates had changed. BJP had given tickets to newer candidates. Was that a reason? I think the winner was the same party, wasn't it?
Yeah, we actually done this by party. This by party. Okay, is that good? Yeah. Okay. Let me show you a second argument. The second argument is, what about turnout? Turnout in 2014 and 19 was high, we know that. We know the BJP's vote share went up. We also know the vote share for the incumbent candidates went up, for the incumbent party. The electoral volatility in UP did come down. It was 43.4 in 2014, which is astoundingly high. It was down to 33, but it's still high. Right? So, claim number one, yes, there are more strongholds in 2014 and 2019 in UP, but it's not that UP is filled with strongholds. Number two, yes, there is lower volatility, but the volatility is still quite high. And this, of course, is my favorite, and I'm really proud of this because I'm still learning these statistical packages, so I made this, right? Here's what I did was I looked at the BJP vote by village for 2014 and 2019. Here's the BJP vote in 2014. Here's the BJP vote in 2019. This line here means if you got 25% of the vote in 2014, you should get 25% of the vote in 2019. Correct? This is the line of equality. You should get the same number of votes if you were going to be living in an extremely predictable system. What do we find? BJP actually lost votes in lots of polling stations. It won, of course, more. There's no surprise. If you look at the graph, it's showing you where the increase is, right? It got more votes overall, so obviously it did better. Look, in some places it got almost zero and got almost 80% of the vote. Here it got 50%, here it got 80%. So in other words, when you look at this data, there's a cloud. There is volatility even in the BJP's vote share. It is not that the BJP is continuously getting votes. So to me, that's the third test for our argument that even in UP 2014 to 19, there is certainly volatility, and there is certainly volatility locally, and there is certainly volatility locally even for the party that was an overwhelming winner. Right? So the only claim I want to make is Indian elections are volatile, and that my test, the argument I made is not only for 2009 and 2014, but it works in what we would euphemistically call a hard case, which is 2014 to 2019 UP and especially BJP. Any questions about this? Does that logic make sense? Yes, sir. Name?
Yeah. I'm Amlan Dutta, Junior Fellow at PMML. My question is, I mean, of course, you are explaining volatility here, but then what explains the sustained number of vote share or even seats, or maybe even increasing number of seats? For example, you're comparing UP here, 2014 and 2019.
That's not my task here.
But I'm just
no, that's a separate question. I cannot answer why. I'm not answering here why the BJP is doing better or why the BJP is doing worse or why party A is doing better or party B is doing worse. That's a separate enterprise.
And just one more question. I mean, there was a column called the same winner.
Yes.
It was the party, not the candidate.
Yeah.
The party.
Yeah. Okay. Is that okay? Is that good, everybody, with this? Yes, no? Already. Now, of course, why is this happening? That's $1 million question, right? What explains this volatility? And here, to be honest with you, the argument is the weakest. Right? I've convinced you, and I want to be level. We are in an intellectual room. I'm not here to get your votes. Right? I have the last permanent job in America, which is, tenured professor. So, without retirement. So, what could be better? Right? So, building a possible explanation. First, what do we find? One argument I made was the reason this is happening is because people don't vote for the top two candidates. And when we look at 2009 and 2014, in 11% of the villages in 2009, the MP wasn't even in the top two. And in 2014, in 8% of the villages, the MP was not even in the top two. And in 27% of the villages, the top two parties were different. In 2009 and in 2014, this was 26%. In other words, these data show that the top two parties in the winning MPs in a constituency, and this is important to know, are not competitive across the entire constituency. Just imagine if a polling, anybody any idea? You should know how many polling booths in a constituency, roughly?
1,000.
1,000. Yeah, 1,000, right? In 100 places, 10%, the MP is not competitive. Right? So the argument is pretty straightforward, that the reason we have this volatility is because the MP is not even present as a player in 10% of the constituencies. That's a lot. In 100 polling stations, the MP is not a player, which is kind of astounding if you think about it, given the rest of the world. So I think that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of volatility at the higher level. The second thing we did, of course, which is why this took a lot of work, and now I'm going to hold my breath and get ready to get beaten up and hammered, because I'm going to talk about everybody's favorite things very shortly. So what we do is we use the census data from 2011 to derive what I call village level correlates, to see which villages vote for the top 2 candidates and which villages have higher volatility, right? So what is my aim? My aim is to argue to you, and I just want to run through the logic. The logic is, what are the villages where the top 2 candidates are different, right, than the top 2 candidates in a constituency? Yes, because if the top 2 candidates are different, then we know that these villages, villages where the top 2 candidates are different are actually, what are the social characteristics of villages that are, what are the social characteristics of the villages? Let me explain this, make sure I get this clearly. What are the social characteristics of the villages in which the top 2 candidates are different in the village than in the constituency? Is that okay? What are the social characteristics of the villages in which there is higher volatility compared in which there is higher volatility? Is that okay? All I'm going to do is get social characteristics, and I have to rely on the census data, because that's the only data we are using here. The census data at the village level only gives you some factors. It doesn't give you lots of variables. There's no religion variable. So among caste, we only have Dalits and STs. We also have some data on literacy. We have data on, what are the public amenities in a village, right? Like schools, roads, etc., right? Post offices. We also have data on marginal workers and cultivators. So we used a bunch of those, and I just want to share the results with you. Now better get ready. Okay. What do we find? That the number of illiterates lowers the number of votes, right? Basically lowers, right, vote for the top 2 candidates, which means in areas where there are more illiterates, the top 2 are more likely to get votes, that are less likely to get votes, right? So the top 2 candidates in a constituency are less likely to get votes in a village where there are more illiterates, and the volatility will be higher in places where there are more illiterates. More developed villages, right, the amount of votes, think of the more developed villages. In more developed villages, the top 2 candidates are more likely to get votes, and in more developed villages, the electoral volatility is also lower. So if you think of, we'll get to the other ones in a minute. If you think of illiterates and more developed villages, what is it telling you? What it's telling you is that in areas which are more developed, where there are fewer illiterates and where there are fewer illiterates, you are actually going to be more likely to giving votes to the top 2 candidates, and your volatility will be low. Okay? We can then look at the same thing for Dalits, scheduled tribes, total population, and cultivators, and marginal workers has no effect, right? And no surprise, if the total population is higher, it lowers the number of votes the top 2 candidates get, and it raises the total volatility. Okay, so you can go through these and we can discuss this in more detail, but I don't want to belabor this. The point I just want to, these are results that are, for those of you who care, are from a multi-level statistical model, and we are only limited to data that is available in the census. We don't have any other data, right? This is all census data. So these are village level correlates. And for those of you who care, I thought I would present this, and I don't know if I should I say this, Pranav, about the turnout? Okay, I also discovered that where there's more illiterates, turnout is lower by a small number. Villages with more illiterates actually have slightly lower turnout. And of course I said that to somebody and they said, no, you're all wrong, this is bogus. But that's just the data.
Urban areas also
you'll be surprised. That was shocking. Urban doesn't make a difference, total population doesn't matter as much. Those are common myths we have. but the data doesn't support that fully. But
Where Dalits are,
yes,
you have lower volatility
Yes.
compared to everything other than.
yes.
Would
Dalits
that,
also,
would
yeah,
that mean that they
they're more
vote
stable. More
along
stable
cost
voting.
lines?
Yeah, could be. Could be. We can, you could say that. Okay. So what is the conclusion in a nutshell? The conclusion is uncertainty surrounds Indian elections. Many voters vote for different parties in successive elections. And as social scientists or as thinking beings, we should be careful to assert, number one, that strongholds are common in Indian politics. Number two, that caste party linkages determine the outcomes of Indian elections because the outcomes of Indian elections are too uncertain to be predicted by any such linkages. Right? And of course, the argument I'm going to pursue or try to make is that I think, and I've been warned, I should just conclude with this, that the uncertainty may exist because I think political parties, and I'm going to put Rahul on the spot on this, because political parties are not present as organizations in all areas across a constituency, and it is the organizational weakness of political parties, no matter which political parties it is, some are more organizationally weak than others, may actually explain why we are getting the patterns we are getting, and maybe that these political parties are biased in how they are set themselves up, so that certain groups are less likely to be part of the political process than others. So I'm going to stop there. I've taken exactly 40 plus minutes. I'm very proud of myself. So thank you, and I'll take any questions.